Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second panel in our independent animation how to series. Today we will be covering writing. And we've got 5 fantastic guests from from the indie animation community who are going to introduce themselves. Thank you all so much for being here. First up, we've got Ben.
Hi, everyone. Great to speak with you. Like Kiki said, my name is Ben Feldman. I am a WGA writer, and I've been working in production and development for about 10 years. And I'm also the studio lead of Adventure Noises. We're a full service indie animation studio that works on a lot of narrative and commercial projects, as well as also probably a lot of series as you might have actually seen in the indie space. Our own internal stuff we also work on as well. Marabelli, A Scoundrel's Tale, and Accidental Gehenna, both projects we're very proud of, and just kind of great to be here. Hope folks will learn a lot.
Okay, thank you so much, Ben. Next up, we've got Gary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Tremarkey. Also, super happy to be here. Thank you for having me on. I am the creator slash writer for Failing Upward. It's a slice of life series about two long distance friends kind of just trying to make it through their 20s. Yeah, I'm also a voice actor and editor on the show as well. And we've been releasing episodes for a couple years now. And yeah, I'm just super happy to get to talk about writing with everybody.
All right, thank you so much. Bree, tell us about yourself.
Hello, I'm Bree. A lot of people may call me Circa Bree, but I know that's a little hard to pronounce sometimes. I am the creator of Belfour's Traveling Circus, which is a show about a soul collecting demon and his best friend, who just so happens to be the prince of the fourth circle of hell, running out of the planet of the fourth circle to go start a huge traveling circus that just goes all across the different kinds of planets, different sorry, all different planets, all different worlds to put on one of the greatest shows like ever seen. All for the all because they oh I'm so sorry. I'm very nervous. But all because well Belfour owes a soul collecting debt of what 6 million souls. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm very nervous. I'm kind of a wreck, and I fully am. I'm very like surprised to even be here, and I'm very happy to be among all these other people as well. But I am a director. I am a writer. I am also the lead animator of my series. And I also have an ongoing series right now that is a prequel to this show. And we currently have 5 episodes with more to come.
You're doing amazing, Bree. Don't worry about it. All right, thank you so much for the intro. Alex, who are you?
Hey everyone, I'm Alex Browie. I'm the creator of Wildcard. We've been around, I think, since like 2019, so we've been producing content for a little while. I'm the writer, I'm the director, I'm the producer, sort of a jack of all trades on the project. And we had a successful Kickstarter launched in 2020, and since then we've been working on a fully animated pilot that follows the main character Jack, who's a legal student who sort of forms this unlikely relationship with a really nervous and bad lawyer named Nolan. And they kind of go on to solve these murders and mysteries. And you kind of get to see this overarching plot unfold. And we also have a comic series that we're working on right now that we have 5 episodes out on YouTube. So really excited to be here. I'm really happy to be with my fellow creatives and to just have a space to talk about writing. I love writing.
Welcome to the Hub Streams, Alex. We're so happy to have you with us. Chris, who are you?
Hey everyone, I'm Christopher Wade. I am the creator, director, and writer of the action adventure fantasy film The Will of Monsters. It's a story that follows a young, powerless witch named Pi who crash lands in the land of monsters, and she has to make some unlikely allies fast in order to survive. So yeah, I'm here to talk about like writing, developing your characters, talking about world building with the rest of these fine folks. Let's do it.
All right, awesome. So, we've got a slew of topics for you guys here today and a couple questions from the audience as well. So, we are going to talk through those 5 different topics and those 2 questions that were pre-submitted from the audience. And then at the end of the session, we are going to do a Q&A and take a couple questions from the live audience. So, if you have a question that you would like our panelists to answer, please try your best to save it for the end or copy it so you can paste it again later and save it at the end. And we will pick a couple questions and answer those. But first, we want to talk about world building. World building is obviously a very important part of writing any animated series, and we want to know, how did you guys go about world building? What are your favorite and most challenging parts of world building, and any other experiences that you would like to share? We're going to discuss that for about 10 minutes, and I'll let any of you take the floor.
I guess for world building, the most important part about any of this is probably just going to be getting things down on the paper. Um, but a lot of the pre-writing that a lot of folks do, us included, is going to be just about orienting yourself in your setting and also very much your audience. A lot of the things we're probably going to touch upon later hit more about knowing your characters' backstories and understanding like how they engage with the world around them. But one of the first things that we sort of did for like Marabelli Scoundrel's Tale, it's a story about an oceanic scoundrel man who basically lives in what is age of exploration sailing. Basically, sort of the big nations during the 15th and 16th century. So, doing some research and trying to figure out stuff for how would different merchant organizations work, how what are some like stylistic choices that might be helpful for setting up the world, and in terms of like a fantasy sailing pirate adventure, a lot of the things we can kind of just say, okay, people understand. Like people have seen Pirates of the Caribbean, people have seen like Wind Waker. People understand sort of what the aesthetics of the world are, but the biggest thing is really just knowing enough about the history to be able to know what to say and what you need to just be like, okay, we're at the same place now for things that are more like ubiquitous, things that like we get. So if you have like a really big like sci-fi setting, I would say, or like horror, but it's like a certain kind, it can be based in like, this is just Earth, but you need to set kind of what the terms are for this setting to sort of figure out where it all fits. I think it's the most important bit of that.
Hey Ben,
Yeah.
I got a question for you. What since your story is a little bit more seafaring, I'm interested to know like what kind of research have you done to like build the world and make it feel consistent and convincing.
That's fair. I mean, a lot of our research has tended to go more towards the production design of the setting itself. Like the Venetian merchant republics of the Age of Exploration and a lot of like coastal cities in Madrid have actually been some research. I guess this is also pre-work to an extent to just sort of make the world feel a bit more believable. So finding sort of design inspirations, has been a pretty heavy part of that. And it's all these little pieces that make a world more cohesive. I mean, storytelling, like, I think we all are kind of just like Avatar The Last Airbender, a master class in world building and storytelling and writing. And a lot of what they created is based off of research of like real world peoples, cultures. They've sort of been able to incorporate into this place that they're building, into this setting. So
Hmm.
try to do a little bit of that when we can.
Cool. I know like when it came to the Will of Monsters, I was pretty big into like building the setting of where Pi crash lands first. Um, at the time when I was making this version of the project, I was living in Poolsville, Maryland, and that's more of a very um, it's a very woodland kind of mountain-esque area that has a bunch of farms and a bunch of large, huge forests around the area. It's probably one of the only areas within Maryland that has that much stretch of land before going into the city. And I've always found it extremely peaceful and extremely beautiful, but also like in its own way, kind of brimming with its own history. So I really wanted to like get the feeling of when you're walking along the fence line of a farm in this area. There's no stores, like there's no sense of a city or a town. I mean, there's civilization somewhere, but you're kind of alone in in this part of the state, or hell, this part of the world. So it's always like I wanted to capture that feeling of being in that particular setting, being in in that particular location, of like admiring the beauty of, oh, there's a whole lot of land where I can run around and be free and probably chill with my friends and probably camp out if I wanted to. But if I were if it were just by myself, what would happen? Like if I didn't know how to take care of myself, if I didn't know what's in this area, would I run into a wild animal? What would I do in that instance? And I think that being able to dream up or imagine what would you do in this situation, or what would how would or even thinking back in your own personal experience, how did I react in this particular environment? That will really help. That really helped inform what I wanted for the story. And I think drawing on personal experience or lived experiences or even observed experiences can really help in fleshing out what you want, not only in your story and characters, but also for the world and setting itself.
I
Yeah,
would
I definitely agree with that, Chris. I think drawing from personal experience is something that's so valuable. Speaking as someone who's working on a series that's more based in reality, I think you sometimes are at a crossroads when it comes to world building because you're like, well, if this is taking place in an actual real world setting with, without magic or anything like that, what do I do with world building? And for me, I grew up and went to college in Boston. And so I decided, like, I know the city really well. I love the city. I want that to be the setting of my more realistic series. And so I used that and I used my knowledge of the area and living there and experiencing what the day to day, even just like what the buildings look like, what the people on the street look like, what shops there are, and putting that in my series really helped me flesh out this world. But you can also put your own spin on it when you're working more realistic too. How is your version of Boston or New York or Seattle or wherever you choose to put it, even if it's a new made up city, how is that unique to your series? And that's really where you can expand upon that world building. So I totally agree with that.
Hmm.
I have the
Yeah, I'm
biggest,
gonna.
dumbest smile in my face right now. Just because that's the whole thing about it as well, where the way that your characters will approach the setting and how they interact with it is also a really big part of how you do good characterization. Like what Chris was saying in terms of like, what would this sort of vast empty space kind of be? Is it a sort of a peaceful world? Do you want to show that there's more action? Are there farms clustered all around? And the choices you make with that in, is this going to be a really active setting or is this a more just sort of explorative sort of thing? And that's a choice that's going to influence how you tell your story in the most effective way.
Hmm.
Well,
And
something I always think about is your world that you're building for your story is a character. Like what
ooh,
like
yeah.
there's a
Mm.
certain personality to this world that you're making. There's certain depths that you can really go into. Like what's the personality of this world that you're making? Like I feel like approaching like building a character will lead to some really interesting choices and also some really unique choices because there's so many different ways you can approach one particular location. Like I know that a lot of like a lot of stories they'll be like, "Oh, we're in the underworld, we're in hell." But there's so many different ways you can do it. Like for mine, for example, I looked at like different planets and I looked at different sources of like literature. Like Dante's Inferno is a huge thing, and each level of hell is a different location. And so I take that and I'm like, okay, like this sort of um we can take this sort of trait and then just build a character out of this and then in turn turn that into a whole new world.
it really warms my heart to hear you say, like, you got to think it's good to think about your world as its own character. I heard Hats Off Media talk about that with their project Screen Time, and it blew my mind. It's such a good way of thinking about of thinking about how your characters will interact with your world, and in a sense of like, yeah, you have a setting and you have a location, but then you want to start to think like, what happens beyond just the location, and how does the location uh how does your location and setting kind of kind of interact with your characters, or how do your characters interact with that setting? And that that interaction says so much about your story. Like, even with like even if your story is centered in, like, purgatory or hell, or whatnot, then you mention planets. How does that work? How do those elements converge on each other and really start to speak to the audience? Or even, how does it even rhyme with the message that you're trying to convey to the audience? And I think that's a really powerful thing that you can do with your world.
Yeah. I totally agree. I was actually wanted to go back to something like Alex had said, like, um, about kind of just like, even if it's a real world place, you kind of have to give it a little bit of like a spin, and like a personal touch. I think one of the, one of my favorite films or cartoons or whatever, like the one thing they do is like, specifically with the place I know, they always make me see it in a new light. So like, if you can kind of like introduce me to a place I've known for years in a completely new way, I always think that's like a big success.
Yes.
And yeah, specifically like my favorite thing, and something both Bree and Chris had said was like, how your characters interact within that world is a big part of that, I think. Specifically with Failing Upward, like, it's a story about, two people, Cody, who's new to the city and it's kind of his first time living alone, and JC, who's revisiting her hometown, and they're kind of seeing these places in certain ways for like the first time, like maybe through a different lens. Maybe they've been to the city, or obviously JC has been home, but like it is kind of just about catching that like awe and wonderment of like, oh my god, this place is totally new to me, even if I have been here at once before. So like those are like my favorites. Like, and a lot of that just has to come down to like, just like, Chris and Bree had said, just like your characterization, like the social settings you're setting up, as well as the physical ones too. So yeah.
I remember
Yeah, definitely.
I
Yeah.
remember I remember watching Craig of the Creek, and then realizing that it takes place like really close to really close to where I grew up, uh, and finding out that the characters are like just like all the kids are just screwing around in a
Mm,
forest, like
mhm.
next to a little creek. I did that. I did that,
Yeah.
and who's laughing? But like, to your point, like, yeah, like, you want to create it's always nice to create a world that feels familiar, and that you're also seeing it for the first time too. Like, it's a different perspective. It's such a unique thing, and personal thing, when you really take your cartoon, and or take your idea, whether or not it's film or not, or
Yeah.
novel, or what have you, and making it, making it relate to what you saw, and what you did, or
Mhm.
or how you lived, when you were younger, or how you're living now. Like, that's a powerful human element, that if you are creating, or if you're just starting to create something, having that human element, and bringing it to the table, and making it fresh and interesting to a reader, is, I can't emphasize enough just how strong an idea that is.
And it's like save like I think like one of the things a lot of writers should do, like in my like my advice to a lot of writers who are just starting out is like really like hone in on your experiences. Like don't let memories slip away, because like a lot of your memories and real life interactions make for the best writing, and they also kind of explain, like I think they help explain like the mindset you were in when you were in that setting, and like they help add to the world you're building, more or less.
Hmm.
So like, like I do think it is like a little harder with kind of like real world settings to, what can you do with New York City that hasn't already been done, but you can. I mean, like, your experiences are unique to you, and like they paint that setting. So I would just, like, absolutely just like really hone in on those experiences that made it special. And so, like, your point about Craig of the Creek, that was me. I was a kid with like Recess. Like, that's literally like, that's a show that takes place on like a playground, but there's like a million things going on it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's an entire ecosystem, which is crazy when you really break it down. But like, they managed to take that, like, 500, 600 feet or so and turn it into an entire world. So, I mean, like, you can really do it with anything.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you guys for that rousing discussion on world building. Love just hearing you guys exchange ideas and how everyone approaches it differently, and also the commonalities that exist between all of us and the way that we identify with media. That was cool. Okay, the next topic is story and arc development. How do you approach outlining your story? Do you think of arcs kind of as you go, or do you have them all planned out in an outline from the beginning? What are your strategies? Let's hear it.
Honestly, I don't think you can prep like far enough in advance. Like, I don't think there's any amount that's too far in advance to start prepping that kind of stuff. I've been working on like my plot points and character arcs and plot twists that I have planned for like 10 years. I'm not saying you have to do that, but like taking the time and energy to just really map everything out and make sure that your audience knows that you have a plan, because I feel like so many of these series fall into the trap, particularly with my genre, which is the murder mystery series, where it does feel like it's being made up as it goes along, or you'll be watching an episode and you'll be really excited because there's a cliffhanger, and you watch the next one and it's completely different from what you were expecting, and you think, wow, like, did they, like, well, are we watching the same show? Like, did the writers actually watch what they put out here? Because this doesn't really make sense. So I think a lot of preparation needs to go into that, and making sure that, like, you have so much time, especially with an indie series. It typically takes years to produce even just one episode, so you have so much time to write all of that stuff out, make character bibles, series bibles, really go into depth about your character history, how they interact with your other characters. And my biggest piece of advice is, if you are working on a murder mystery series, plan out the mysteries and the clues in a way that makes sense to your audience. Show it to as many people as you can, obviously under NDA if they're not working for you, um, and make sure that it makes sense to someone who's outside of you or your team. Because thinking about it from my perspective, when I'm writing a mystery, sometimes it makes sense to me, but then, like, my friend will read it and will say, "What? This doesn't make any sense at all." So you sometimes get too trapped in your own head. And the one example I always think of when it comes to mystery series is Gravity Falls writer Alex Hirsch. There was a big plot twist, I'm sure that everyone knows at this point because the show is super old, but that people guessed super far in advance, because his character arc development was so good that people were able to pick up on those clues. And instead of him frantically rewriting the ending of his series or the ending of that episode, what he did was he went online and posted a fake leak. And then people, like, immediately jumped on that and were like, oh my God, so it's not this thing, it's this thing. And to me, that's a super smart thing to do. Instead of, like, he already laid the groundwork and he can't really change that now. So the only thing he can really do is potentially divert people's attention away from it. But I think so many other shows fall into that trap. Like Game of Thrones comes immediately to mind as, like, the series that was really building up to something, and then right at the end, it's like, what are they doing? Like, they completely rewrote like all of their characters just kind of out of nowhere,
And
because
that's
people were guessing the plot points and they
because
felt
it's
like they needed to
also
change them.
because at a
I
certain
don't want.
point, and this is a thing we've seen probably for a lot of indie stuff as well, writing kind of becomes locked in once you sort of begin your process. Like if you're doing things
Right.
episode by episode, it's a bit easier to sort of have a little bit of wiggle room. But once you really get into it, you sort of have to follow the path you've set for the most part.
Yeah.
And also do love the 10 years of pre-writing. As we all know, as J.R.R. Tolkien taught us, the first thing you do is invent a 100-year history and a new language anytime. On the acceptable way. And Kiki, I was actually interested if the question was more about, because when I think of like outlining story and arc development episode to episode, versus like over the course of the entire series, I feel like it's sort of a different animal to an extent. Like for episode to episode, the most important thing is really just having like a beat sheet. Like, what are the significant parts of the story of an episode? And just jotting down the notes of what those are from the beginning, of just sort of like, okay, so the character wakes up, this is the problem that's put in front of them, here is first issue, here is something else that happens in it, and just making that structure for yourself is a really helpful part of developing the story of an episode. And it's going to help you be a lot more structured for it because, as we all kind of know, the hardest thing is putting something on the damn page. So that's just a helpful thing for that. But as you look at sort of the entire arc of the story, you sort of have to, again, know your characters really well and where do you want them to grow into. So interesting characters have sort of like a flaw with them or like a reason they're the main character that's going to change before the very end of the story. And understanding how they shift as they move through the events that you have planned is incredibly important to do. And having that sense allows you to do that. Like, it just feels like it's something you're going to do even before you start doing just like the episode writing. Like, you're going to know where they're headed.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like sorry.
No,
Okay.
you're fine. Go for it.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like something that's really important. I do this with my own writing process. Like every single time I think of an episode, or if I'm in the middle of writing an episode, I always think to myself, okay, what's the point and where am I going with this? Like, what's the main thing that I'm trying to say with what I'm writing? Because it can be different. It can be like, if you have like a slice of life series, it's basically a free reign, but there still needs to be some kind of point to it. Like, is this episode showcasing like a major character flaw? Is this showcasing like the interactions between characters, like how their relationship is? But definitely, if you have an episodic or not an episodic series and you have like an end game, know what your end game is first for your characters and for your story, even though it really is all about the journey.
It is so much
Yeah,
easier to build backwards from there, 100%. Like, once you know where it's ending, you can kind of make the scaffolding for it. Absolutely.
I already have end games planned for all of my characters. It's just how do they get there is what's really important.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm glad you talked about slice of life still needing to have like some kind of strong structure, because like that's one of the things like I think when I'm doing my show, like I do struggle with sometimes, because there is kind of the inherent like want to just make it really free form and just like, just do kind of literally a slice of life. You're just like peeking into a window. But I do think those kind of tenets of just like, what is this episode about, are really important to kind of captivate the audience more or less. Like, I personally don't mind watching stuff that kind of just like rambles on. I love mumblecore movies. I love stuff like that. But like even those like have like, points to make. And I actually want to go back to something Alex had said about like murder mysteries, and like it can apply to anything. Like, like when you get feedback, like don't like be resistant to it. I think
Yes.
that's kind of like the mistake a lot of people make. Like you think you have the most original story idea ever, and like I'm doing something no one else has done, but maybe that's for a reason, maybe because it doesn't work. So like if you stand your script off to somebody, like, and that's not to like dig at anybody. It's literally just like I've experienced this with people. Like, people hand me scripts and I'll be like, well, this is my honest opinion, and unfortunately with feedback, feelings might get hurt, but like I always try to be really professional. But I've had my feelings hurt a lot too, where it's just like, no, I thought that was a really good idea, and like now I'm kind of like I really want to do that, but now you have me rethinking the whole thing. Don't be afraid to change things early on, because early on, like Ben had said, like you get locked in eventually. Like, so if you're going in and like you're so set on this one idea, and then like when you're doing animation, you're realizing, oh my god, that feedback before was right. It's not working. It's too late by then. So I do think taking feedback and like really honing in on what makes the story work and what's not working about it early on is really important. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like having a roadmap is great, but that roadmap can change too. So you know, don't be resistant to change.
I think I think you guys really hit the nail on the head when you say like show your concepts or your early beats or even like your script. Show your stories to at least one or two other people first, just to get a general sense of, are you hitting the right notes? Do these characters work? Do your jokes work? Do are your character are is your audience scared, or do they feel something for your characters at the right places? Does the message come through clear? Because I think what's more important than having a character arc, or even or even a destination for your characters, is to have a consistent message. Because one thing I found that audiences kind of bristle at is when, again, like, we're going to bring up Game of Thrones, but it's not the only outlier here. It's not the only a project that's guilty of this. Is when it establishes who characters are, and what the rules are, or what the world feels like, and it sets a consistent rule, and then it just flips it on its head, like in the final few seasons, and everyone's like, this isn't the same thing I've been watching. And
Mm,
there's plenty of other
Exactly.
there's
yeah.
plenty of stories and
I,
Mm-hmm.
projects out there that are exactly like that, where they they introduce what the concept of the show is, and then they turn around and say, nah, it's something different now, and
Yeah.
audiences can kind of
yeah.
feel that something has changed.
Right.
And sometimes that can work, um, but you kind of have to slowly build upon ideas in a way that feels consistent and believable, and most importantly, entertaining to your audiences. Because at the end of the day, this is show business. This is not like this isn't just like things happen to characters business. This is a business of the characters happen, and you want the characters have things that happen to them, but the audience has to feel something for them. Otherwise it's boring, or it's confusing, or they're asking the wrong question, or the audience is asking the wrong questions. So
Um,
I'd even go as far as to say that you might come across a story where a character might not have an arc, and that can work, but you have to be a competent enough creator and writer to be able to know how to make that work, right? Like, does the status quo of the world change in very subtle ways? Does the character actually change? Do they learn something, or maybe later on they refuse to change?
mm,
And I think that in itself can be a much more interesting story down the line, especially if you look at real life. Some people don't want to change. Some people have the right answers given to them, laid out before them, and they end up getting worse. And that can make for a very entertaining story. One of my favorite shows is like what Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, and the main characters, they get so much worse as time goes on, and you see it happen. And yeah, there are absolute arcs that happen to them, but it's entertaining along the way. And you kind of want the audience is always waiting. Are these characters, or is Breaking Bad man, is he finally going to change? Is he going to do good? And he does. He changes,
it's,
but he gets
well,
worse.
spoiler no. I also like want to say like to kind of like change it. I want to say if you find yourself in a position of like you have a very successful indie series, I want to say that fan feedback and like personal feedback from people you trust are two totally different things.
Yes.
Oh,
Um, yeah.
Yes.
So like
Oh.
obviously, listen, you
Yes.
want to cultivate a fan base. In some senses, you absolutely want to give fans what they want because they're the people really fueling your show. But I also, like I think about like there was a sitcom I liked called How I Met Your Mother. And for years people thought this one couple was going to get together, and the writers seemingly really wanted to avoid that because like, yeah, they're a cute couple, but this is a show about growing up. We don't want to like stick this character to one thing. And then by the end of it, they totally went back on that and did that. And it ruined the ending of the show. And it just made no sense. It was just really weird. And I think they completely misread the room on what fans wanted. Maybe a minority of the fans wanted, and went with that. So, just like don't feel pressured by like fan interactions to like pair characters together or have the story go in one way or anything. And this is really like kind of a hyper specific take because like success in the indie sphere is kind of in some senses hard to come by, but I'm just saying like if you do find yourself in that situation, just take fan stuff with a grain of salt, more or less.
Well, very, very briefly, there are also
Dude.
ways on a smaller scale where that actually does help. Like, basically, you want to get your script in front of as many eyes as you can because they're going to very often see things that you don't because you're going to be so close to it. And there are a lot of people that I do trust to have a second set of eyes on scripts that I work on or friends of mine. And we very often make something better from that. And as you do that more, you will get a sense for, okay, this person, is this actually like an important note, or are they not really understanding the genre or the story that I'm going for? Or is this something that you didn't see that you take for granted as obvious in your story that someone else doesn't?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think in that way,
Yeah.
like I like having making sure that what you're trying to say with your story and with your characters is paramount to what happens to your characters. And that way, if you have a if you have a if you have trusted individuals who can help guide you or uh, help give you really solid critique while also listening to fans that can also rhyme with that critique, then you'll find that your story will be better off rather than you becoming reactive and listening to audience who are mad for reasons like um for really quick example before we go to the next one, like uh early in the Simpsons, like a lot of people say like the Simpsons early seasons were the best ones, right? Well, there was still a subsection of fans who absolutely hated those seasons. And I'm talking like the golden years, like seasons 4 and 5 and 6, way back when like many where I'm sure like some of the listeners here may not have even been alive. This is like golden age stuff. And
Chris, you're gonna
audiences
make
back
everyone turn to dust. Like Gravity Falls is old, Simpsons is old. Oh my god.
I'm gonna I'm gonna walk her, dude. After I heard that,
I'm disintegrating as we speak.
I am as old as The Simpsons, so this makes me feel really old.
That's my fault. Gravity Falls is not that old, everyone. I'm sorry. It was like 2016. It's just old to me.
my bum hip.
Okay, this feels like a good time to transition after we've all become one with the universe and return to the ground. So we have a question from Coffee Kindred on Blue Sky.
Hello, Coffee.
Hi, Coffee Kindred.
Coffee says, as someone who's wanting to write for my own animated series someday, I find that coming up with episode or plot ideas that aren't overdone to death is possibly the hardest thing to do. How do you come up with your ideas for episodes or plot? What is your creative process? We're gonna do 5 minutes on this one, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
I was gonna say there's no original ideas. I mean, I know that's like a high school English teacher thing to say, but like it's kind of true. Like the ideas are what you bring to them, more or less. So don't be afraid to indulge in things that might seem tropey or they've been done before. Just bring your own kind of story to it. Like that would be my advice.
I'm always gonna. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. What can you bring to the table is my biggest thing. Like, what can you offer? Even if it's something like this very, very tropey, what can you do to flip it on its head?
I mean, I'm just always going to keep hitting the character hammer over and over again. And we are going to touch upon this, and I am wringing my hands in excitement, but pacing and characterization are the places where scripts will live and die. Figure out what's significant to your character. It should always inform how the story goes, how your characters move through it. So if they would do something like, okay, our character is a really, really shitty oceanic bastard man whose life is an entire trash fire. There could be an entire episode dedicated to him entering like a poker tournament and cheating at cards using the help of children. Like, he's a very scummy, stupid, like, awful man, and we love him for it. But that could be an entire thing, and people do like a poker episode. People do like a let's do a scam. Like, that's all of Ed and Eddie. Like, like they were saying, Alex and Gary, like, there's no original ideas, but it's going to become stronger from the fact that it makes sense for your characters and it's going to fit to the.
Hey Ben, can you say
Uh
that one more time? I think we lost you.
oh.
Oh no,
Oh no, I think
Gravity
we
Falls.
lost Ben.
He's been
Oops.
Gravity Falls.
All right.
Oh,
Oh no.
Does someone
Let's
else
see
want
for
to
a second.
want to take up the conversation, and Ben can tell us what he was thinking when he gets back?
sure. So the question was like, how do you come up with your ideas for episodes or plot, and do you have a creative process to it? Um, this one's a little tricky, in my case, because there are times when I will have dreams of like just interesting scenarios that I'll wake up and go, "Oh, that was a good idea." And then I'll quickly like open up my iPad or to pick up my notebook and quickly jot it down and start seeing, okay, how could this work for characters that I have in mind down the road? If The Will of Monsters was ever an animated series, how could that work with other characters that come in mind? Oh,
Oh,
wait,
thank
Ben's
God.
back.
Sorry.
Welcome back.
Hey, good to see. Good to be here, Chris. Glad to be. God, my internet.
Do you want to
Chris,
finish the thought that you were giving
Where
us?
where did it cut me off? I mean, like, really
uh,
Um
entire episode about scamming people and having children help you. He's a shitty person. 9 times out of 10, your character should move the story forward. I'm upset. This was a good point. But legitimately, it's really, what would your character do in that moment? What's significant to them? How are they going to be moving through the story? And it can literally be anything, but that should always guide you. And 9 times out of 10, that's how you have something that feels fitting and fun, even if it's not 100% original, because it makes sense to your characters and your story.
I'm gonna,
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna agree with you on that one. There was an old post on Twitter, I think, where someone had mentioned that plot is the thing that you throw, that you just throw to people as scraps, but the real meat of the story is the interaction between complicated characters.
That's
And
good
Yeah.
storytelling.
yeah, like if
Yeah.
you
Huh.
figure out like what intrinsically motivates your characters, whether or not is just like, say like in Bob's Burgers, Bob wants to take care of his family, and to take care of his family, he has to make sure that the burger shop stays open and makes money. The conflict there is that his family is uh a bunch of chaos demons, uh, where no one does exactly what he wants them to do, and even the people around him, even his own customers, they they're they, they're just they they make things so much harder than they need to be, and he just wants to create. He just wants to make basic sandwiches, and the interesting conflicts in Bob's Burgers usually revolves around those simple motivations. But if you're stuck about trying to figure out, in what could happen in this episode, or what could happen in this episode, well, again, that comes back to, what are you trying to say? If you're trying to, for instance, in the Will of Monsters, if you're at least in the grand scheme of things, if you're trying to tell a story about interconnected people dealing with dealing with the fact that their world is about to change, then you want to then you will at least want to have episodes that revolve around the history of the world and your characters, or at least certain characters who don't know the history, learning more about it and about themselves. Um,
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, I was gonna say, like somebody in the chat, just like just going off of the Bob's Burger example, like summarize the whole show with the quote, like I love you, but you're all terrible. Like that is like the like definitive summary of that show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But like I mean, like one of the more interesting things that show also does, like which is really important, is also like it has Bob like introspect upon himself and like realizes that he might be a chaos demon as well. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like I think
Mm-hmm.
I think like that's also really important is to like is to not only set up like your standard ideas, but also kind of like extrapolate upon them. Like, you know, why is somebody this way? You know, like why is Bob the way he is? And that's something that's really good for a series. You know, for a movie, it might be, or not a movie, or for a short rather, it might be fine to have a character like kind of stay stagnant. But I love that like you know, like you can introspect upon those things, and that's what makes it more original. Like, you know, the idea of a guy owning a restaurant and like, you know, the people around him being a little crazy isn't original, but kind of extrapolating about why Bob is the way he is what makes it even more interesting than it, you know, the setup kind of like would lead you to
Mm-hmm.
believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I just think kind of like digging a little deeper into that even is really fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And since we're moving on to characterization anyway, it seems like building upon what some other folks had
Yeah.
mentioned. So like I have to come up with a unique murder for every single episode that I put out because I have a murder mystery series. And you might think, oh, there's like a million different scenarios for that. You could just put them in a hat and say like this person got stabbed on top of a building and then was shot with a rifle from a helicopter and then was pushed off the building. Like there's a million ways you could do it. But despite that, it's been done already. You know, there's no point in placing so much emphasis on making yours the totally unique, you know, end all be all, never been done before type of story or situation. I think that, like everyone is saying, the characters are what makes it. So for me, it's like, how would Jack solve this mystery? Because your characters are your characters. Like, despite any similarities they may have with existing characters or what they might be based on or inspired by, they're yours and they're completely unique and 100% original to you, and no one else can replicate that. So that's the uniqueness of your story, is your characters at that level too, because you created them. You know, you are in control of what they do next, how they interact with people, how they're interacting and pushing the story along, anything. So I think that's where you can really shine with being unique or quote unquote original, is what your characters do and experience within your story.
Mm-hmm. We're um, it looks like we're in the characterization portion now. So I guess
Vibrate
I'll make a
now.
really I'll make a really quick point. Um, it's to bounce off what everyone just mentioned. Like it's pretty important to have to at least have a short or a story that highlights what is the character, like how did the character get this way, right? Like to go back to like Breaking Bad, uh um the what's his name, Walt, or Breaking Bad man, the main bad man, uh, is
Old
you
Baldy.
old Baldy. You think like
Valdi.
you think that
WW.
you think that he is um like he is a desperate, prideful man who's only doing what he does for his family, and you find out how evil he becomes throughout the series, because it looks like that the power of being, Heisenberg has corrupted him. But no, you find out like in very small ways, this guy's always been like this. There's an episode where Walt um is walking through his house years earlier, years before like he had kids with his wife, and he's young, he has hair, and he is just he's not really happy with this place. Meanwhile, his wife is loving it. She's thinking about places that she can put, places that she can put the furniture, what can hang up on the wall and stuff. She is ready to have a family, and Baldy McDrugman is just so mad about this place, and you can see him kind of seething and coping about it. And he says something, and I forgot exactly what it was, but he says it essentially means it's not enough, and that kind of defines him for the series as a whole, where like no matter what he does, no matter how rich and how great his name becomes throughout the series, it's never going to be enough, because number one, he's never going to earn the love of his family that he once has, and number two, he's never going to earn the respect from the criminal underworld like he wants. He's just some schlub and tidy whiteys that was a high school teacher who never made it in chemistry. That's it. He just got lucky working on drugs and just used it to his advantage. But that's something you can think about as far as characterization is concerned. Having an episode that really pins down as a character study, like if things were different, would your character actually be different, or would it just reflect who they are inside?
Hmm.
Okay, I'm going to tell everyone the secret to writing the best script. Are we ready? Do we feel prepared for this knowledge? Because
But
pacing and
I'm a
characterization are probably. Oh, are we ready? We got to take a second. Are we good? Because this is.
I'm ready doesn't begin to describe it. Do it.
I have read hundreds of scripts. I have a job where I work in development where my job is literally to review and look at scripts and see what works and doesn't work. 99.99999% of the time, the thing that takes you out of a story is one, when something a character does doesn't make any sense or doesn't move things forward, and having a strong character is one of the hardest tricks to pull off. In indie animation, we see this so frequently that what makes the best main character? They need to be moving the plot forward. There are so many pitfalls in writing, and there's nuances to everything that we've said here today and that we're going to say, but without mincing words, from the very start, if you're working on your pilot right now, your first scene should show us why we care about this main character, establish who they are in the setting in an interesting way, because very often in a professional setting, if you don't hook someone in 10 pages, sometimes even less if they have a lot of stuff they have to review and they're looking through pitch after pitch after pitch, that's where you need to do it. And the things that take us out of stories are when it doesn't make any sense. Because we've established, you've built this character, we get so much time getting to know them. I'm sure all of us can think of a few examples of times where characterization took a sudden left turn because it felt like whoever was writing it didn't understand what they were supposed to be or what they have been built up to be. If you understand your character, and you know how they react to scenes, that's going to do almost all of the work for you. And if something doesn't work in your script and you're not sure why, you need to look at your character and see, is what they're doing, would that make sense? Would their reaction to a situation make sense? Is it too over the top for them? Is it not reacting strongly enough? What's their dynamic with the person sitting across from them in this scene? Are they fighting on behalf of something? Do they not have the same like resolution as whoever they're like up against? And what do they want from a scene? We're going to hit upon this more in pacing, which is the other vitally important part of a script. But in every scene, there are a lot of scripts I read where there's a scene that's there and it's really cute and you think it's really fun and it's wonderful, but if you were asked, like gun to your head, what does this scene do? What does it accomplish? Why is it there? Sometimes people don't have an answer for that, and you should. Because the difference between the tightest script where everything has its place, like arcane levels of writing, is basically everything flows into everything else. Your main character is driving action forward. It's not a bunch of other people shoving them into a scenario because that's not dynamic. You want dynamism. You want these characters to feel alive. You want their choices to matter. And that is the single most important thing you can do as a character writer.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to even follow up on that, but I think I guess something very important that also kind of goes into just writing characters in general is something I have seen with some indie projects is that they try to give too much importance to too many characters. Like, let background characters be background characters, let side characters be side characters. If that is their main purpose, unless, like, you figure out, like, already that they're already, like, they're going to be important later on, just let your characters be side characters, because otherwise you're juggling so many, like, different plots. Like, oh, we need to focus on this character. Oh, now we need to focus on this character. And you end up getting, like, these stories that are way too bloated and even hard to follow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what I do recommend is please sort your characters into hierarchy of importance. If you have too many important characters, really, really dial it back. Like, ask yourself, why is this character so important? If they really aren't, like, a character that serves, like, a huge, like, purpose to the overall story or the overall, like, point of your story, it's okay to let them be side characters. Because I feel like unfortunately, I feel like some scripts, like, really don't do very well if you just have so many characters that, like, everyone has an important, really sad backstory, or everyone has, like, oh, this character is related to this character because they're the brother, and this other character is, oh, they're their uncle's boyfriend, roommate.
Or even if you're like two comic relief characters.
I'm going to talk trash about a cartoon real quick, because as much as I respect it, as much as cool and popular that it is,
we're not supposed to say this. This is dangerous.
I think
Censor.
My Hero Academia suffers from so much.
That's not where I thought you were going. I'm not gonna lie.
Me neither.
Me neither.
Now, I'm not sure if he was being serious or he restrained himself.
No, I'm actually being serious. Like, I know we all have a picture in our heads, but I'm being genuine, right? Because My Hero Academia has a really great premise, but it has like a billion characters, and while I think that some of them are great, there is like 1,000 episodes, and most of them deal with this with the green haired boy who's sad and is a dork, and I love him. Don't get me wrong, I think he's great, but like whenever there's an episode with a girl, they love him. And that's not, and I'm like, I want to know about this character, and like, no, I'm the villain girl, but I have to love him. I'm like, that's stupid. Like, they don't have anything else that goes on that goes on with them. And like there's like, he has 15 other classmates, and and like 13 of them have like lame powers and have like next to no backstory, but you get like 27 lines per episode.
In writing, we have a term called
I wanted to say, like, I think what you might be pointing towards is more of an industry trend problem, specifically maybe within the anime subgenre, like of animation.
But none of y'all here are in anime. All of you are indie listening. You guys can do something about this.
Absolutely. Like, I think when you have a big series, unfortunately, you have to sell toys. You want more characters.
Of course.
Yada yada. That's just what it is, unfortunately. But to kind of go in on your point about, like, Deku, like, specifically, like, yes, I think the main takeaway from this, like, if you have a strong main character, that's pretty much all you need. Everyone else can be a supporting cast. You don't necessarily need to pump everybody up. You know what I mean? Like,
there are a lot of shows that do ensemble casts really well.
Sure. Yeah, White Lotus does that perfectly. But
they just not have as many overlaps. Like, if you have two comic relief characters, kill your darlings. You will be doing this a lot. You'll be editing a lot. Why is there not just one comic relief character if they do the exact same thing?
And that's
If there's
that's
someone
my
who's like a side character who only exists to deliver exposition, does a random character need to be written just for that, or can you have one of your main characters do that? Just tightening
that's
it up. It's all a bit of that.
that's really my point
Sure.
digging into My Hero
Mm.
Academia so much is that like it has it has like a ballooning cast of characters, and not all of them have a function. Some of them don't really have to have like a serious great function, but the problem is that the camera or even the writing and even the pacing goes back and forth between different characters so often that the side characters don't really offer much, not even so much as even comic relief. They just talk, and maybe they'll shout a specific thing, and they'll shoot an energy beam, and it's kind of nice, and it's a little neat, but there's not really a lot of editing there in that regard because there's so many characters. If you can't kill your darlings, or at least write them in a way that makes them interesting enough for them to kind of not stand out, but at least bring something more to the table, then you just have empty people filling up space. Like I can think of like three characters that can be rolled into one in that show. And if you
Sure.
can do the same, you're creating more real estate, at least in the sense of writing or in the sense of visuals. So you don't have giant crowds of characters that you have to write, or that you have to create lines for, or that you have to create an arc for. Like, just you'll figure out, oh, if it's becoming too much of a pain, then you have too many things to you have too many things that you're juggling, and it's an easy way for you to fall down a pit of having having a giant anime cast. And the reason I bring last point, the reason I bring it up is because for most of indie fandom that I've seen, a lot of us are anime fans. A lot of us are
Mm.
fans of just animation in general. So we're bringing inspirations that we all know and love right into our story. It's probably a good idea that you kind of just walk a couple steps back, take a look at your giant cast, and say, do those two characters need to just be one character? Can I get away with that? Can they just can they offer
Yeah.
something else? Well, can I do this in fewer words and say the same thing? That's what you want
Imagine My
from
Hero
art.
Academia with two Bakugos.
No.
I I also want to
Would
say
that
like
would that enhance the experience for you, or would that just feel weird? That's a
only
good,
so
I
much.
think. Point.
Like, I feel like the cons outweigh the pros on that.
Also, Chris, what like really, while you have now opened up the field to taking shots at anime in general, thank you very much for that. One final thing on characterization. Sometimes main characters are made the audience insert, and you very much have way more interesting side characters, whether they look better designed or they actually have compelling backstories that you're like, why don't we look at this more? This is way cooler than Green Bean McBreak Arm. So a big thing is, why do we focus on your main cast? Why not someone else? If you have a character that doesn't have wants, that doesn't have faults, that doesn't have conflicts, if you write like everyone loves them, they're great. Deku has faults. God, he has so many faults. And part of that makes him more interesting to watch. But sometimes, if you're looking at your script and you're like, man, this is supposed to be the main character, but I really like writing this one, what's stopping you from making that one your main character? You are allowed to
I think
do
you
that,
allude.
especially in the pre writing phase. Before anything's been made, before any storyboards, any animation, you have the ability to just be like, no, actually, you know what? Screw Break Arm McGreen Bean. I like this one.
I
But
think you
just
read
don't
my
pick
I
mind.
I
Mineta.
think I
Just
think
don't pick
there's
Mineta.
like
Just anyone
I
else.
yeah, I actually want I think that's a really interesting point when you have a side character that is more interesting than the main character. I think that can work sometimes, but only if you're making like a point about that, right? Like
Mm.
about how like maybe your main character is a stick in the mud and the side character kind of is there to show what that main character could be if they weren't like that basically.
Yes, because they play
So
off each
yeah.
other.
Yes.
Exactly.
Sure, exactly. They're good foil. Yeah, it's a foil basically.
Mm.
So like I do think you can do that, But yeah, I do think there has to be a there has to be a certain amount of faith you're putting into your main character. Like you need to understand how they work. They can't just be stagnant and boring the whole time. They need to evolve, and they need to kind of break out from from the cast essentially. And it's actually interesting. I can't think of many examples of, like, off the top of my head, because maybe I'm just not like I'm not remembering, but I can't. I'd love to know if there were any writers that had that issue where it's like, oh man, this side character is so much more interesting. I should just make them the main one. But yeah, I think that is a very fascinating kind of like way to look at it, where it's like, oh yeah, like maybe there's something more here. So I totally agree. I was actually and like I do want to say something about side characters really quick before we get off of characterization. Like they don't have to, what, like the main character, they also don't have to stay stagnant. Like they can evolve, they can be vulnerable. Um this is a live action example, but like one of my favorite like subversions ever is, I don't know how many people have seen this movie, but there was a Joseph Gordon-Levitt movie called 50-50, and Seth Rogen plays his best friend in that. And you kind of go in expecting Seth Rogen to be like the raunchy best friend, which he is, but they take the time to really, over the course of the film, show how he evolves and like is super, maybe even more vulnerable than the main character. And I just always think about that when I'm writing side characters. It's like, the character doesn't have to be, a side character doesn't have to be strictly comic relief. They can be more than that. They can ascend maybe just below the main character in terms of development. So I think there are like a million ways to look at how you structure your cast. But yeah, I would also just like, yeah, try to inject something into the main character that really makes them stick out. Yeah.
I want to make this point really fast. If your audience is more gravitated towards like a very specific character, or especially a side character, like over your main characters, like you might want to evaluate like why. Why is your audience more gravitated towards these side characters rather than your main character? Because personally, I think that's a bit of a problem if your audience is more attached to your side characters than your main character. It's it is something I have seen before, where it's just like, oh, these side characters are just so much more interesting and the audience absolutely loves them, but absolutely nothing about the main character. Like, who cares about him? So please, like, make sure your main character is interesting, and maybe like think about like why is your audience more gravitated towards your side characters, and maybe you can learn from that and apply that to your main cast or your main characters.
Yeah. One quick thing. Sorry, I know that we're way off time for this, but
Keep going one quick
one
thing.
thing
Like,
from
yes,
me,
these are all important though. Fuck.
like you don't necessarily have to have a main character. If you're working through your script and it feels like that's not the direction you want to be in, you can have an ensemble cast that does work
Yep.
for indie animation. Like
Yes.
you can still do that, and I think of live action examples that work really well, like Lost, or I think someone just said Glee, which I have mixed thoughts on, but it's a good example of an ensemble cast where each episode focuses on a specific character, and the way that they're structured usually is it'll follow the character in the present and then flash back to the past to show what they've done in the past and how that connects to the present, which I think is a really interesting way of storytelling. But if you're really going through the process and it feels like there's no one good fit for your main character, you may want to think about an ensemble cast, keeping it smaller, obviously, but you don't have to be tied into just one main character who's like the mascot or the face of your show.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I would, and if I can just say this one very quick thing, and I've said it many times before on another panel. Be a fan of other things besides cartoons.
Yes.
Live action.
Oh my god.
Yes.
If
Yes.
you're if you're having trouble trying to figure things out with your characters, watch a film or read a book or play a game that actually has those kinds of themes that you're looking for, or even if it's in a different genre. And I guarantee you that variety will help you if you're studying hard enough, if you're asking yourself, what do I like about this thing? Or what could this thing that I'm experiencing, playing or watching, what could it have done better? That'll help you in your journey as you start as you dive more into characterization and start to really for lack of a better phrase, complicate your characters in the positive way.
Chris
Push
is
yourself like
absolutely
okay,
right. Good writing is universal, 100%. Doesn't matter
push
what the
yourself.
genre is, doesn't matter what the medium. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, no, I keep cutting you off. That's my bad. Push yourself like Chris said. Push yourself out of your comfort zone, even in live action as well. Like there's like I know a lot of people like to watch like newer things. Like this is the hot trendy thing right now, but oh my god, there is a massive back catalog of decades of film out there. Like there's just so much. Like go further back, like learn from people who did it like 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, doesn't matter. Like there's just so much out there, and like a lot of the stuff that worked back then still works today in terms of like storytelling. So there really is like there's no going wrong in terms of just like looking for stuff outside your comfort zone. So yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
I don't want Kiki to. Okay, please don't be mad. I swear this is the last thing. All of this is, by the way, based on it being about character-based writing. There are plenty of incredible storytellers that build primarily like environmental storytelling, and it
Mm.
is a setting that can carry it. All of this is just based on one very specific kind of writing that a lot of people enjoy. But you don't have to have it character-based if your setting is well made enough. That's it. That's all I have to say about that.
I just learned so much from you guys just sitting back and listening to this. That was some incredibly valuable information, and I'm definitely going to be listening back to this specific section of the panel a few more times to take some notes. Yeah, it's fine that we went long because, as you guys are saying, like characterization is the most important part of writing. So, really appreciate all your valuable insight on that. And I feel like the rest of this kind of can just trickle down from what we were talking about, because our next step is pacing and dialogue. We're going to dedicate about 10 minutes to that. How do you plan out your pacing? What tools mentally or, on paper or whatever are you using to pace out your story? What are your preferences for writing dialogue, etc.? Let's go.
It's silly to say, but just speak your script out loud. I mean, you're a person that speaks whatever language you're writing in, presumably. I mean, I don't want to assume. Like you could be like, I've decided to do this entirely in Elvish. Like you go off, you do you, King. But like, you know what sounds like normal dialogue and what doesn't. Just talk it out. When you hear people discussing things, you can get a feel for if human beings talk like that. And if you don't, again, this kind of goes into experience more media, look how other people handle dialogue writing. Pacing is a harder conversation. I want to hear what other people are saying about that before I jump in, because I talked way too much during the characterization moment.
You made
So
a lot of good points. It's fine.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
so so I would kind of talk about pacing in a way where it's like, when I think of pacing, I think of a story speed, or how
Mm.
it's the difference between watching a Miyazaki film where the camera settles on a character who doesn't really say anything, but they're let's say they're riding their little horse up a riverbank, and you get a sense of the characters that are walking past. Gives you a sense of the time period, what kind of animal life is there, just a general sense of peace, but also foreboding. Compare that to something like Family Guy, where you don't really get a lot of environmental storytelling. You get rapid fire quotes, rapid fire dialogue, rapid fire uh, rapid fire lines that build into the next scene. Which, to its credit, Family Guy is a very funny show, and the whole point of that is the more you watch, you get a sense of how people talk. Everyone's done that. Everyone done that. Hey guys, what if I do this? And that pacing is in your brain where you automatically go to a flashback, right? Like that's kind of like ingrained in this now because of the cultural zeitgeist that show is. But you really want to get a sense of, what do you want your thing, your story, your project? How do you want it to feel? Because when I think about pacing, when I think about speed, I think about those two, well, I think about those two pieces of media. Do I want things to kind of do I want to go on a walk with the director, or do I want to go at a brisk pace and then break my ankle and fall on the ground with my arm swung across my back? Like that's the kind that's what I think about when I think of the term pacing. So you could have a bunch of characters talking all at once, and it can still feel very, very slow and methodical. If you've watched the show, I'm sorry, if you watched the film called Summer Wars, where it has a giant crowd scene, it's like this
You make me
large,
cry. Think about Summer
huge,
Wars.
yeah, this
Wow.
huge family sitting around at a dinner table, just talking. Everyone's talking a mile a minute. They're passing around food, and you get a sense that these people love each other. You get a sense that this place that they're in, this house, this huge home, has history. All that is still environmental storytelling, but the pacing and the characterizations of those characters allows you to kind of, in a sense, fall in love with with everyone at the table, because that is a family, and we all have one, two, or three, or everyone at that table at some point in our lives. And that's, to me, the point of pacing and dialogue, is getting the feeling of where the director or where the writers are trying to take you with this story. And that's what you want to kind of instill in in the show, film, short that you are developing. How do you want to take your audience by the hand and guide them? Do you want to actually hold them step by step and kind of like loosen your grip as things get kind of crazy, or do you want to hold it the entire time, put a rocket pack on your back, and just the entire way through? And that's not bad either. It could work, but those are things you can think about.
I think
I
it's
feel
also
like,
difficult.
Yeah.
oh
Oh,
man.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Someone else can go. I've talked a lot.
Brie, you
uh,
wanna go?
yeah, I think I'll go. It kind of piggybacks off of what Chris said. I feel like what's also really important about pacing is also what's the emotion you're trying to like give.
Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would want to have like a scene that's more somber, a scene that's more sad to of course be a little bit more slower pace because then the audience can really absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't really want a sad scene to like just snap and it's gone because then your audience doesn't really know what happened. It's like, oh, was I supposed to be sad about that? Is it funny? It was a joke? Because usually faster pacing is energy. It's usually why a lot of comedy tends to be really fast paced. And I also think a lot of shows, especially nowadays, we have short attention spans nowadays, so a lot of people tend to gravitate towards faster pacing, though I tend to really disagree with that. I think slower pacing can definitely still thrive nowadays.
Yeah.
It just
And I
depends
think
on
it's
how
Yeah.
you. Oh, sorry.
yeah, I feel like it's really important to do have like those moments where your story does like slow down and allows the audience to really take in like what's really going on here. Especially like I said, if it's like a scene that's supposed to be very somber.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to
Um.
Bree's point, it's a thing you get more sense of the more you do it. And like Miyazaki, the example that Chris was given before, a master at knowing when to pause, when to breathe. But some people who might want to have scenes like that might have it go maybe a bit too long. So there is a blend to
Mhm.
figure out. And part of that is also, the visual aspect and how you're choosing shots to pair with your script. But if we're
Yeah.
just talking about the whole idea of like moving people through a story, and if you take someone's hand or just launch them through it, it really gets down to, does this scene have a reason to exist? Sometimes it's okay to just sit with your characters and have a really cute moment, because the purpose of a scene can just be characterization. It can be, I am showing the audience more the interaction between our cast, so later on they feel more connected to them or understand why someone's doing something, but that has a purpose. Because if that scene didn't exist, it might be, oh God, they just met each other. Why are they risking their life for this person they just met? If you have that moment where it's like, we really got along, there's a lot of things we have in common, showing that isn't just a random thing you're throwing in, it's part of building that process so everything makes sense. So when you have those beats, have them have a purpose.
I want to go ahead. Sorry, Brie.
I was gonna say there's definitely a difference between, like, I would say, like, dragging out a scene for too long and allowing your audience to breathe, because sometimes you can come across a scene where it's like, shouldn't we be moving on already?
Yeah.
But
I wanted to bring up a scene, specifically letting your kind of characters breathe and like have like just a tender moment, or just like a moment that characterizes them. You know, I kind of go back into pacing. Like, we live in kind of like a, you know, a TikTok driven world where like everything is so instantaneous, and like you want to, like, everyone's trying to get to the point. Like, rarely in films do we have those moments anymore, especially on a big budget kind of way. A lot of people made a big deal about that one scene in Barbie where, like, it's just Barbie and an old woman talking, and it really has nothing to do with the whole plot. Like, it's just like her outside experiencing the world and like taking everything in, and then she kind of just turns to a woman and has this like really tender moment with her. And I think the reason people were so obsessed with that scene was because it's so like not like in right now to do that on a mainstream Hollywood budget. And I feel like in the indie world we have so much more freedom to have those smaller characterization moments, and I really do endorse people doing those. But at the same time, I think you also have to be aware of what you're making. If you are making an action show, you can still have those moments, but I do think people go in expecting a certain thing. But you know, like, specifically, speaking from my perspective, I write a slice of life show, so like, I am more inclined towards those moments. I am more inclined to have more dialogue driven things that aren't kind of like preoccupied with being visually dazzling so much as they are about kind of like talking about the characters. I had a point to make, and now I can't even remember it because I kind of got off topic. But
different genres.
I just think being aware of what genre you're working in, right? Like, that's the important thing when it comes to pacing. If you are doing a slice of life thing, like, you can kind of move at a more, you know, like, slower pace, so to speak, you to kind of take in the world around you, because that is the star. Like, the characters are the star in that sense, like, and taking in the world around them is kind of important to them. But if you are doing something more actiony, like, you do want a faster pace, you do want something a lot more, you know, just, I don't want to use the word in your face, but like just kind of more breakneck speed. I have something to say about dialogue, but I want somebody else to go because I kind of need to collect my thoughts.
I'm gonna chime in real quick just to talk about Barbie, because I enjoyed that film, but I gotta say, like, that scene that you mentioned when Barbie like has to sit down with the cute little old lady, I love that scene, and I say that that scene made me lean in so hard on that part, and I hate that term so much because like companies,
no, it's fine.
yeah, you know what I mean. It feels like a buzzword now, but like, I was kind of I was laughing at the film at the parts where the film said I needed to laugh, and I was like, I'm having a good time. But that scene where Barbie is sitting alone and she starts to take in the environment, and she starts to realize, just that she starts to get a hint at what real life is like. Well, the pain and the suffering, but also the peace and the actual beauty of it all, that that shit actually worked for me. And not only did it say much more about her world, it said much more about her character. Like, what kind of Barbie is she, or what kind of person is she becoming? And I think it's important when when you want to talk about, when you want to do characterization, when you want to talk about pacing and dialogue, that you do have moments where you you do pace out moments where the character is having a conversation with the audience, not necessarily a character looking into the camera and speaking directly to the audience. That you don't have to do that. What I mean is allowing the viewer to have some alone time with with that particular character and focus, and learning about something that they didn't that they didn't know about themselves. And I think that can be an excellent point in pacing, but also an excellent point in having someone and having characters just, or just you, the writer, just being able to reach out and speak to your viewer. And I think applying a little humanity, even if it's a little cheesy, I will say at the that Barbie
Oh
scene
yeah.
was cheesy. I think that's the worst it got. But like I said, it worked for me. I understood what it was trying to do, and it allowed some brevity or at least a little bit of humanity to shine through. And I think that's what you kind of want. Not necessarily in that particular way, but it can help.
I want to walk back actually what I had just said about like, oh, you need to be aware of what genre you're in, because I do think you can do hybrid stuff like that.
Yes.
That works too as
Yeah,
well. Um, but
definitely.
you know, like I want to once again, I don't want to harp too much on the Barbie thing, but that is the moment where the movie transcends being the Barbie movie, right? Like it's not just about like this cute little, you know, it's not about like this cute brand basically. It is about kind of like what it means to be someone. And you like I think you can pepper those moments into other genres. Like, you know, one of my favorite like genre hybrids that nobody really talks about. Everyone loves the movie, but like John Wick is like the first 20 minutes of that movie are going a totally different direction. Like the rest of the movie goes in a totally different direction than what you think that movie is going to be when you first start watching it. If you had not seen the trailer. So like I think like it is possible to like transcend genre and do different types of pacing within like an established form basically. Like you can have a slow burn action movie and it's totally fine, or a slow burn indie animation in this thing, but like a slow burn action indie animation, sorry. But yeah, I don't know, I just kind of want to walk back what I said, and yeah, you can have those like different pacing ideas in different genres more or less.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
and I
middle
think
ground
what's
is you
really
have to know.
interesting is that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, can I
No, I was
jump
gonna
in?
say
I
you
haven't had a
just have
chance to
to.
talk on this topic yet.
Go for it, yeah.
So I think what's interesting, one comment on what Gary just said, I think a good example of that is definitely like a hybrid drama comedy, like something like BoJack Horseman, where that
Mm.
has this brisk comedic pacing, but then jumps into these more tender moments. Um, but I think the interesting challenge that we face as indie creators, as people who have limited budgets, and most of us are working on a single episode, like a pilot, is that thinking about how are we working pacing into a very limited time frame. Because some of us, you know, with limited budgets can only afford what, like 10 to 15 minutes for an episode, and this is our first real episode. You know, if it's a pilot, this is our first introduction to the series. So how are we making sure that we're managing effective pacing with such time constraints? I think that's such a unique challenge that the indie community faces, and it's one that we're actively working on. I'm actively working on as I'm developing my pilot, trying to think, okay, how am I able to afford the time that I have, but still make an episode that has good pacing and is effectively getting the story across and the characters across and cramming everything into this small time frame that I have. So I'd love to hear other folks' thoughts about the challenges that you face with that, and thinking about like how you work with such limited resources but still have good pacing.
Oh, is that a question like for us?
That's yeah, I'm kind of
Yeah, I mean,
interested.
I'd love to
I
open it
want
up
to hear
to
somebody go
folks'
first.
experience
Yeah,
with that.
please. I
I
want to
mean,
hear.
there are good rules for how to do a pilot. I mean, a lot of it is really just focusing on what your series engine is. Like, because, yeah, that's a good point where a lot of people might not get that second episode or have a bit of issue like funding for it. So it's really a matter of what is your show about and letting people experience as much of that as possible in the first episode. Our show, Marabelli, A Scoundrel's Tale, is about an absolute oceanic bastard man who is in a scenario that he does not need to be in, and he is not equipped to help children save the world or be anything other than just the worst individual that's ever lived. But that shows you what our arc is. We have massive sea monster battles. We have people shitting and panicking and running like a coward. We have moments where children wield firearms. I mean, and in that pilot, you're going to get a feel for sort of what to expect for the rest of it. And the important thing is to just, you are allowed to not resolve everything neatly at the end of the pilot, but really just show people what it's going to be. Like Bob's Burgers, even back to what Chris said before. You understand that it's about this guy who is with his kids and he tries to, find ingredients for burgers and just have his family be okay, and his children are an active mess, and his wife loves him, but it's like this crazy thing, and you know what everything's going to be about from that pilot. Have it be illustrative of what you're going to do. And don't have to stress too much about world building everything. Just make it a fun experience and have the characters make sense.
So, the challenging thing for me when it came to pacing and dialogue was, listeners may have already guessed it, but I tend to ramble. So I had to. This was it wasn't a giant problem, but there were you creators who are getting voice actors, you might run into this. What am I saying? You will run into this at some point, where when you have a script and a voice actor comes in and they're reading lines, there'll come a point where you'll hear it, you'll hear them say the line, but it doesn't sound right. And you must have gone through this line a billion times, even with your friend or even with a trusted individual. But hearing your actor finally say that line that you finally got to doesn't sound right. So at some point, you might have to say, let's try it a different way. Or how would you say it just normally? Just how would you say it naturally? And being open to just being able to beat or just being open to beat around lines of dialogue that can that'll help free up your character or help free up how they sound and help free up the pacing a bit more once you're in the midst of production. It'll actually sound like your characters are real people because you got some feedback from a real person, and that real person just happens to be the actor. It's, at least in my experience, probably a good idea to be open to the fact that, okay, maybe I'm a little long winded. How can we make this a little bit natural, or more natural? How can we simplify this the line of dialogue? You can do it earlier on too, but even when you're done, even when you're on the clock and you're kind of going through recording, that's not a bad place to just be open to changes as well. As long as it doesn't change the entire trajectory of the story, be open to less is more, or saying the same thing with fewer lines of dialogue or fewer words.
Yeah,
Some
that's
people
exactly
are
what I was
allergic.
getting at too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like I get so overwordy with scripts, so actually relearning how to fit that into a limited format is something that's definitely been a challenge, and I know it's a challenge for other indie creators too, because you feel this need to fit everything into that one shot because you're like, this is it. I only have funding for this one episode. This is the one thing that people are going to see. I need to cover absolutely everything, and that's not the case. You'll go through the process and there's always going to be cuts like we were talking about before. There may be a scene that you absolutely love that's just not working or not moving the story along, or even I've cut characters out of the pilot that were supposed to appear, and even potentially we're going to have a big role, and then we just thought, something's got to go to make this fit the timeline that we're looking on. And I think that's such a unique challenge that we deal with as indie creators working with limited budgets, is making it work concisely and really making those tough decisions and thinking about what absolutely needs to be in here and what maybe doesn't. Maybe you save that for a comic, or get funding for a potential episode 2 down the line, or explore that further in the series. So it's really about making those tough decisions. And I appreciate the insights because I struggle with the same exact thing and trying to fit into that old rule of, one page of a script roughly equals 1 minute of runtime, and really
Oh,
thinking about it.
yeah.
If I have
Yeah.
10 to 15 minutes, how am I taking my 25-page script and turning it into half that?
I gotta
That's
be
like
honest. I gotta be honest. I kind of threw that. I kind of threw that rule out the window because I do see shows
yeah,
that
I was gonna mention that too.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I do see.
You get like you get these shows
go-
that have like 45-minute long or 45 pages, and then when it's really all said and done, the actual episode is like 20 to 22 minutes.
We all have
Yeah,
our
the
own.
the guides
it
are good
depends
to
on.
put you on the right path. In the same way
Sure,
that you
yeah.
don't have to have your first
Yes.
script be BoJack Horseman. You don't have to do it because dramedy is difficult. Slow burn action movies aren't done that much because once you understand action movies, you can deconstruct them.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's okay to just try something out in the basic form of it before you go nuts with it and try to fit 45 pages into 12 minutes. But yeah, like there are things that you can subvert as you get better at this.
Yeah. And it's not to say like, oh, you have to make like a cardboard cutout action movie or whatever. Like you can
No, never.
innovate along the way. Like you can make tiny innovations as you go along. If you didn't, I think it would actually be boring. But like it is one of those things where like you don't, like you said, you don't have to make BoJack like your first thing. Like I think that's a really important lesson for new writers, is that like your first thing is probably going to be, like your first. I think I don't want to say like take the
You can
safe
say
route,
it's
but like
shit. The first
yeah,
draft of everything
yeah,
is shit.
sure, yeah. I mean that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
it's
Like,
awful.
well, it's yeah, like your first draft is never going to be good. Like that's the hardest thing I think you have to learn, because like nobody wants to hear that their thing is shit, but in a sense they should, because that means that like they want to get better. But like I kind of want to go back to dialogue before we kind of wrap up. I know we're kind of probably pushing it with this, but um, my Failing Upward is a very dialogue driven show, which it's funny kind of getting reactions from that, because I see some people who are really into that, who grew up on stuff like Daria and like more home movies, like more talky type shows that didn't have super flashy animation, but they left an impression with the dialogue. Um, but like I think like it was like, once you know what you're making, once I knew that like, oh, this is a dialogue driven show that kind of relies on the animation for the expressions of the characters more so than like anything they're doing physically, like in terms of just like actions or whatever. It was very easy to kind of like write the show from that perspective, where I was just like, okay, like I know how this flows now. I know that like like the whole crux of the show is that like the majority of the runtime is taken up by a phone conversation, which on paper I know people are like, what the fuck, like, but like it kind of just worked for me in a way to where like, oh, I like this and other people seem to like it, and some like I must have cracked something here where I'm like, all right, I finally understand the pacing. So I think understanding what you're writing will actually help. Obviously it will help like other people understand what you're trying to convey as well. I think a lot of people go into this and they say they want to make like an action show, or they say they want to make a comedy show, and they don't know what they're writing. They don't have a fundamental understanding of what the product is. I should say product, but project rather. What the project is, and because of that, something gets lost in translation. And if you are putting that out, like I don't think it's going to necessarily catch on with people. And kind of coming from the perspective of dialogue, and understanding what that was to the show and how that was the heart of the show, it helped me kind of just like figure out how to write, like how to kind of pitch to other people. So dialogue for me has always been really important. I just wanted to say that just in terms of like my own experiences with writing. So yeah.
A bit of advice real quick, like if you're ever struggling on dialogue, go have human interactions. It will help you a lot. It can be either like a call with your friends, it can just be going outside and talking to people.
Yeah.
Best writing advice: touch grass.
It sounds ridiculous, but really it does work. Like it's like when you pull from your own experiences with other people. That's where I feel like a lot of really dialogue, like really good dialogue, can really sprout from.
Yeah.
Just interactions that you've had with other people. And like I said, it can even be as simple as just talking with your friends, like in a call.
Yeah.
You can get some really good ideas out of that. Not even just a brainstorming session. It's just being yourself with other people, and maybe you can pull from those experiences and apply it to your own dialogue. So yeah, touch grass.
Yeah, touch grass. I was want to say I've relayed stories to my friends, and like because they know I'm writing something, they'll like sometimes my friends will be just like, that's just like a good bit for like Failing Upward. Like they'll just know like kind of the style and humor of the show, and we'll be talking and I'll relay like, oh, this is an experience I had with somebody today, yada yada yada, and then instantly they'll be like, that's a that's a really good like failing upward bit, and I'm like, yeah, probably. So I think, yeah, it's just like be aware of like it kind of goes back to what I was saying about like world building and everything. Like be aware of the conversations you're having with people, because it makes for really really good dialogue most of the time, and it'll pass you by. I think one of the skills in terms of writing dialogue is just knowing where to source it from. And like Bree said, like get outside, go talk to people, and really like remember those conversations. Like don't write them down while you're having them, but like go home and be like, that was like a really like important conversation I had today. I should write that down. Because like even I miss those things sometimes. And like I said, like people bring it up. It's like, oh, so you're gonna put that in your show, right? I'm like, I didn't think about that. But like it is so important to kind of retain these memories and be able to convey them on the page, because your experiences are yours. Like, and I think those will set your characters apart, that will light up your dialogue. Like, just really kind of hone in on that.
Yeah.
We also had someone ask a really great question, which we could do an entire separate thing on. Bleeding Art was asking how you could do pacing for a story that has no dialogue or very limited. And I was answering in chat a little bit where it's visually mainly, but that is a fascinating question.
Did
I like
you
that
guys
would be for
see,
animatics.
Very tight.
Yeah.
Make sure your storyboards are extremely tight. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Like have an extremely I don't mean polished, like they don't need to be cinematic quality,
No.
but like
No.
have storyboards that have visual clarity so the audience can read and interpret in their mind what's happening very easily. Um, and if it flows well as an animatic, again, having a trust someone to actually look over your work is paramount. If it flows well when the storyboards are put together in a video format where you can actually like listen to the audio where there's like environmental noises and stuff, that'll really help. I think that's a good place to start. Also, watch a lot of dialogue less movies.
Yes, I was gonna say that. Watch silent films.
Yes.
There's a plethora of them,
Yeah,
and there's one that came
I
out this year.
recommended Angel's Egg as like one for them to look at.
Oh,
It's a very
Angel's Egg is
artistic
that's a
thing.
really fascinating
Ooh.
film.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, if they want to know how to do it, I'm like, that's your thing.
Angel's Egg is a really good pull. No One Can Save You came out earlier this year.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. No One Can
Yeah.
Save You is a
Yeah.
great example.
I thought it was rather
The artist,
nice.
yeah.
Study up on old films, like old silent films. That's a good way of learning how to pantomime as a director and as a writer.
Oh yeah, that's a great point.
Also, speaking of people that do very good dialogueless scenes and character writing, Jordan Whitman is in chat. I wanted to say hey to them. Hey, Jordan. Good to see you.
Watch there's a cartoon that I think about a lot that seems to be kind of gaining like a cult appreciation, but was it Untalkative Bunny? Which is like I don't know if it started off on Kablam or something, or it's just a short series. If you were into kind of just like dialogueless shorts, I highly recommend it. There's like 4 seasons of it. So it's like a rare show that has no dialogue that went for like a while. So if you want to see how to do that long term, that's a really good show to watch.
But yeah, Angel's Egg, well, God, what was it? The No One Can Save You, all like great things for that. Yeah, I just thought it was a really good question in terms of pacing, because it is hard without dialogue sometimes. Are we in free time? Are we just able to say
No, we're gonna move on now. Thank you guys for
Okay.
for all the info. I'm just
Sorry.
painting my nails and listening
Sorry,
to you guys talk.
Kiki.
Honestly, it's fine.
Sorry,
So next up, we have a question from Batty, who also had a question for us on the last panel. And Batty wants to know, for any of you who have written for other mediums, how is writing for animation different from novels or comics? Do you guys have any professional writing education or experience, and where do you guys get your inspiration from? This is going to be our last topic, and then we're going to move to Q&A.
Cool. I feel like I can kind of talk in terms of just like I think they mention just how is it different from writing a novel. Is that one of the questions they had
Or
there?
like any medium outside
Or
of
any
just
other medium,
animation.
basically. Well, I will
Yeah.
say that a novel is just like an entirely different thing. I mean, like a novel is a place where you can get
Yeah.
really inside a character's head. You can list things that you would never write in a screenplay just because they're not conducive to the flow of a screenplay. So like just removing that, I think, you know, like I think in terms of just like comic and like other mediums, um comics are interesting because like you could argue that you're still kind of doing a lot of the same inherent things that you're doing in, you know, an animated screenplay, but at the same time I think you have to be a little more direct. There's not as much time in a comic script to kind of like get really into like the meat and potatoes of like a certain scene or something like that. I mean, it's important, but it is mostly comic scripts are usually done with artists, super done with like artists in mind, in my opinion. And same for animated scripts, but comic scripts are really direct, in my opinion. But going to like live action, like writing Failing Upward, I think Failing Upward could easily be a live action show. So maybe for me, like, there's not too much of a difference. Um, but like, I do think about like, you know, how would this look animated compared to live action a lot while writing. Um, it, you know, like I think helping out the artist within your script is really important. You have to be relatively descriptive of what's going on to really paint a full picture. Um, I mean, I'm sure somebody else can kind of like go into more in depth about like their own experiences, like doing one and the other. But yeah, I mean, like I just think it's interesting that like writing a slice of life show that could be live action as well, and like how I write it differently for it being animated. It is a little tricky, but I mean, somebody else go because I'm kind of like rambling now.
So, uh, so when Batty asks, do y'all have any professional writing education or experience aside from your respective projects? Um, I've only worked in one major animation project, and that was BoJack Horseman in like what 2014, 15, I believe. Um, and even then, while I was working on that project, I was involved in a lot of live action not live action shows, but live action projects in the DC area. So I was writing and editing and lugging a camera around for events, creating different scenarios. Writing different scenarios for interviews and just general live action shoots. Real boring shit. Let's be honest. I've been in news media and government media for the past 10 years of my life. Um, but those experiences got me gave me more technical knowledge that I could carry over into animation. So when I think about lighting, I usually had a hard time with lighting when it came to animation, or even anything beyond that, because I'd never really touched it before my current jobs. But now that I know a little bit more about it, working with a live action camera, I've learned this is how light can work in 3D space when my character is in such and such position in the scene. Uh, and that's all of what I'm saying is really tying into you got to go out and touch grass. But specifically, being
Yeah.
able I think being able to hold a camera in your hand, even if it's a phone, and learning what happens in film production or in live action can really broaden your horizons and give you more technical knowledge than just what cartoons can do. Number one, it expands your repertoire, honestly, and you'll have a lot more options in that regard. But again, you can carry that over into animation. A lot of anime does just that. Like, I remember watching the Little Witch Academia documentary, and the first thing they did with new artists is that they gave them a DSLR camera and told them to go shoot the city. And that helped them get a sense of what the environment will what their not only what environments will look like, but also train their eye to know how to position a camera so characters will look interesting, they will look fluid, but most importantly they'll look believable. And I think that once you start thinking in terms of how would this look in real life, you'll start to get a better appreciation for not only just with anime, like look at Satoshi Kon. He started before Perfect Blue or Paprika. He was a video editor. Uh, you'll get a better appreciation knowing more about how filmmaking works if you start dabbling just a little bit more into it and start garnering appreciation for what live action directors do in real life.
And
Sure.
also just appreciating the kind of things that you enjoy as well. I've like Chris, I've also got my start in live action production and did that in the New York area for about 10 years, and currently my day job is literally reading scripts and writing notes and coverage to help creators basically improve what they're coming along with and make dialogue smoother and character interactions, but you can do anything with it. Sometimes our team, Adventure Noises, will do writing for visual novels or video games. And the kind of dialogue for there has to have multiple purposes, not just a matter of storytelling, but also like describing how gameplay works. And a lot of us get our start in just writing the things that we enjoy. If you do D&D, you are probably going to be a better storyteller than a lot of people overall. Write little short stories about characters you enjoy. When I was younger, literally, I would just write little like character interactions and short stories for D&D characters. I found that so fun. And just keep doing it and keep doing the things that you love. You'll eventually make it into what you do for a job. And that's the best feeling in the world. It really is. And years
Yeah.
later, looking at just like being in the Writers Guild and working on amazing projects and collaborating with this community, there's really nothing better, legitimately and truly.
I want to go back because I'm coming from somebody who I don't animate. I'm not an artist. I'm coming from someone who's purely a writer who's interested in making animated content. I would say one of the most valuable things this like whole experience with Failing Upward has taught me is just getting to understand artist perspective, and understanding what you can and can't do, especially on an indie budget. Um, so like I think I didn't necessarily come from live action background. I went to college for film. And just halfway along the way, I was like, I don't know, I just want to write cartoons. Like that's what I really want to do. I'm not an artist. I've taught myself to draw a little bit just to kind of have some kind of comprehension of what's going on. But I think just interacting with artists, if you are kind of coming from a different medium, is and specifically you're not an artist, is really important to understanding the medium that you're going into. There's a lot of complaints going around right now about kind of like comedians coming into the genre, or the medium, and being like, oh, I want to make a cartoon because that's really trendy right now, and not understanding the pipeline and kind of going off, and the show will end up imploding because nobody really knew what was they were doing. They just wanted to attach a show to like a hot name or something like that. And I just think understanding artist perspective is one of the most important things you can do coming into this whole indie animation scene. If you are like me and you are not from that, basically, I've just kind of learned like, you might have a really big idea that you want to do, that you think it would be easier because it's animation, but then you kind of pitch it to the artist and they're like, that's like way out of our that's way out of our league. We're not able to do that on this scale. So just I think that is important to kind of understanding the differences between other avenues and indie animation, is just understanding kind of like limitations and everything.
Does anyone have any
I don't really,
academia
I don't
questions?
really have, I don't really have anything to add, unfortunately, because I feel like a lot of the points I made about like finding inspiration is basically, yeah, just like going out into the world and like just taking inspiration from what's around you, just
Touch
from
grass.
touch grass, basically. Go watch more movies. Go read books. Go
Also,
find some scripts online and
Yeah.
every
find
one of you,
and
as we
Yeah,
oh sorry,
absolutely. Go find scripts
like go
online
read
and
some
read
scripts.
scripts. Yes, absolutely.
and as we get like questions coming in from you guys. Please also go follow all the amazing people that have been at this panel if you found anything even a little bit helpful. We're all making shows that we really love to do, and we're trying to make them all happen. So any support you can give on social medias, on YouTube, on Twitter, I refuse to call it X, please go ahead and do that, and we'll be very happy to always help and share more stuff, because the entire purpose of this series is to sort of give back to the community and also help people as much as we possibly can, because you guys are making incredible stuff too, and we cannot wait to see it as well. And
Yeah,
happy to
there's so
support the
much
community as we can.
there's so much out there in indie animation that I feel like we haven't even like scratched the surface on yet. Like there's just so many amazing creators out there that I feel like I hope these kind of events like this panel, or like a pitch night, or like indie animation day, that I hope kind of like exposes a lot more people, because like right now, I mean, like we can all name like 5 or 6 indie animated series that are really popular, but for those 5 or 6, there's like, I mean, God, how like hundreds more that are out there that are waiting to be discovered. And I feel like social media is such an amazing way to connect to all these things, and like just more of it deserves recognition.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure.
Chris down there dunking on Mineta. High five, man.
I'm in the chat dunking on the Great Juice Kid or whatever the hell his name is.
Yeah.
Don't mind me.
All right, we are close to signing off now. So, in lieu of Q&A, since I'm not seeing any questions in the chat immediately, let's say, what has been your favorite part of the writing process so far, or like what has made you the happiest about making your cartoon so far, and then we will go ahead and end the stream at 2 hours.
I think just seeing ideas on the paper for the first time makes me like happy every single time I do it. Every time I write a new scene with a character, or I just read a piece of dialogue and it comes out the way that I really wanted it to, or like I have the voice actor read it back and can hear it in real time, it always just makes me happy, because it's like you can have these ideas in the back of your head for so long, and just finally committing to making something out of them and seeing it all come together is always such a great experience. And even if it's shit, like we were talking about before, like if your first draft is shit, that's totally fine. At least you're writing something, you're putting your ideas down, you're evolving, you're continuing to edit your scripts, go back and forth, get feedback from your peers, get feedback from your voice actors, your animation team, and just make it even better. Like that's part of the process, and it's fun, honestly.
Oh, we got a good question from someone. How do you write in a character's cultural identity with it being important and also not overly preachy but remaining respectful?
Make them people first. Give them motivations that anyone would care about, but it's still specific to their still specific to the place they live or the family that they grew up with. Just it's I don't want to say it's not difficult, because if you haven't grown up in that environment,
Or Adobe, Toon Boom. Toon Boom Harmony is pretty good.
Yes.
I think Sound Cut for some people.
Not Adobe.
Sounds off.
Not Adobe.
Not Adobe. Anything but Adobe. I personally use TV Paint, but that's expensive.
Yeah, I was gonna say TV Paint is really good.
Yeah.
Oh, I think stream's over.
Stream's over? No, stream's
No,
over.
sorry, I switched it to the thanks for coming screen, and it didn't have Discord audio. But sadly, guys, this is where we need to end our panel. So we're gonna have everybody just say their names again and sign off. And if you have more questions for our panelists, please leave them as comments on the stream after the fact, and we will make sure that they get answered for you.
Cool.
Absolutely. Kiki, also thank you so much for organizing this and having us
Sure.
all here. This was delightful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys for
Yeah.
being
Thank
here.
you so much.
You guys shared so
Absolutely.
much great information. I feel like I learned a lot from you, and I'm sure our audience did too.
All right. And stay tuned next time when we go into a 2-hour discussion about no dialogue scenes. Hell
Right.
yeah.
I think this necessitated a deep dive panel series for 2024. So our our organization team is going to start looking into that.
Yeah.
Tap me when we talk about characterization again, please. I'm very
Right,
excited
exactly.
for that.
Like, that conversation could have gone on for much longer. So it will next time.
Let's talk.
Here and talk about like
I would
stuff
love
for, like,
to
7
deep dive
hours.
into genre.
All right. So I guess this is the part where we say our names before we sign off.
Yes.
And where they can find
Yep.
it. Okay. So I'm Christopher Wade. You can find me just about anywhere at It's Me Chris Wade. Twitter, Blue Sky, Tumblr, all that good stuff. You can hit me up anywhere. Hit me up in the DMs if you already follow me, or just shoot me a message. Just shoot me a comment somewhere, and I'd be happy to talk with you if you're nice.
I'm Ben Feldman. You can find everything about the projects that our studio works on, Adventure Noises, at Adventure Noises on YouTube, Twitter, Blue Sky, anywhere where there's social medias. You look up Adventure Noises, you'll find us. It is always great working with folks in the community. So if you also have a project that you're looking to have folks work on, please hit us up. That's literally what we do.
I'm Gary Tremarkey. You can find me on Twitter at Mutant Astronauts. But if you're looking for more Failing Upward stuff, on Twitter it's at Failing Upward TV, and then everywhere else, pretty much it's at Wayback Studios. That's spelled WAEBAK Studios, Wayback Studios. It's also linked down here in the description, I think, as well. But yeah, we have a new episode coming out very, very soon. Got something for Indie Animation Day tomorrow. Very excited to share that.
And then I was Circa Bree, but you can find me a lot easier on YouTube just by typing in Laughing Clown Studios, and I should be up there in the first result. But I'm also on Twitter a lot under Circa Bree, and I have a Blue Sky also under the same name that I'm trying to get off the ground. And if you love demons, if you love comedy, if you love just general, just really fun sort of things, I hope to provide that for you.
Awesome. And I'm Alex Barrow. I'm the creator of Wildcard. Our @ is Wildcard Series basically everywhere: Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. We have a new comic coming out, a fully motion comic coming out at the end of the year, and then we have another season finale coming out early next year, and then we're consistently working on our pilot. I'm not going to say a release date for that because I think that's a trap that most of us fall into, where we give a release date and then it's way past that. So I'm just going to say it's coming eventually.
Taking myself because I do have some really fun announcements for indie animation tomorrow, so find me on the YouTube community tab and you'll find it. I forgot to mention. Sorry.
All right, all of the channels for our panelists are actually linked in the description of this stream, so if you're watching it now or later, you can go find them there, just the first line of the description. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight and listening to our panelists. Thank you, panelists, for sharing all of your fantastic, useful, wonderful knowledge with us. And we will see you guys same time next week for another panel where we will be talking about animation. Yes, indeed. The very thing that draws all of us together here. All right. Say bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.